everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 12th of June, 2025. I was fortunate enough to be on a phone call yesterday with Elizabeth Warren and her team and a bunch of other political content creators about the big, beautiful bill, as Trump has come to refer to it. And I took 3 pages of notes because I learned all sorts of things about this bill that I actually didn't know before that are actually quite scary. And, you know, one of the things that I want people to really be aware of is exactly what this bill says and why it's so important that we continue to make our phone calls and advocate for the bill to go down in flames. For those who don't know, the bill is still sitting in the Senate. One of the reasons why it's still sitting in the Senate is that the GOP cannot seem to get enough votes together to pass it for good reason. So I want to share with you all because it feels really important for all of us as organizers and activists and people who care and who could be impacted to know exactly what the deal is with this bill. And I'm not going to be able to cover all of it because it's almost 1,000 pages long, but I want to give you guys like the top line stuff on this. So when you make your calls, you know what you're up to. And then we have all sorts of other things to talk about, like my rep, LaMonica McIver, being indicted, like unlawful assembly declarations happening all over the country, like no kings. We have all sorts of other things to discuss. Okay, first things first. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a gold, I don't even know what this is made of. It's new. Satiny, shiny top that I feel very glamorous in. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so I love Senator Elizabeth Warren, as you know. Campaign swag from the presidential campaign back there. It was really nice to talk to her again yesterday and hear her thoughts on this bill. So the big shocker for me out of this bill, as someone who is on the ACA for health insurance with my kids, is that this bill actually guts the ACA. Separate and apart from Medicaid, separate and apart from Medicare. It takes a direct sledgehammer to the ACA. And I really want people to be very aware of this because I know a lot of folks here are on Obamacare, a.k.a. the ACA, for your medical insurance. So here's essentially what it does. It undoes 85% of the coverage gains that the ACA gave to people when it was passed. So what does that mean? It means that, as many of you know, there are subsidies that are attached to the ACA. When you go and you get health insurance through Obamacare, your health care is subsidized based on your income and also sometimes by the state that you live in. What this bill does is it cuts $300 billion from the ACA, and where that comes out is in the subsidies. And so what that means is if you're like me and you pay $1,200 a month in health insurance for yourself and 2 kids, and the subsidies that come in for that are like $600, your health insurance bill every month, if you're me, is going to go from $1,200 to $1,800 a month. The estimate for this is that on average, it's going to take people on the ACA, their health insurance up by at least $400 a month. And so that, for many folks, is going to be prohibitive. They're not going to be able to afford to be insured under the ACA again. Devastating, like absolutely devastating. Like I had a moment when I was listening to Senator Warren talk about this yesterday where I was like, oh, because, you know, that means very significant things for me and my family, just like it does for every American who is insured through the ACA. In addition to that, one of the stats that Senator Warren shared with us is that apparently right now, based on current polling, only 1/4 of Americans are even aware of this bill, aware of anything having to do with what's in it. And part of the reason why they did a call with those of us who are political content creators is because they wanted us to tell everybody in our audiences to get the word out, to make sure that you're telling your communities, your families, your friends about what's contained in the bill. So I really want to empower all of you to do that, but we've got to talk about some other things that are actually like in the bill. Okay, so what this bill does is it cuts benefits to the bottom 40% of America to benefit greedy corporations and the ultra rich. It cuts things like SNAP. Their estimates right now are that it's going to kick 16 million people off of Medicaid, either fully or partially. It obviously cuts the ACA, as we've already discussed. it puts work requirements in place for people on Medicaid. By the way, 92% of the people on Medicaid are already working or have exemptions as caregivers or as people who are disabled. The problem is that if you get kicked off your Medicaid, the other thing that this bill does is it takes away the ability of you to apply for health insurance through Obamacare in that event. So this is a job loss penalty. You're on Medicaid, you lose your job, you're screwed. There's no way for you to apply after you lose your Medicaid because you're no longer employed for Obamacare, for ACA coverage, which is crazy. It also does a bunch of other things. It takes away money from the states for certain matching money that would benefit people with health insurance. It also repeals certain guidelines that would allow people to stay on their health insurance. And, one of the things that I really think people need to be aware of here is, and this was something that Senator Warren also pointed out, this is the largest rollback of healthcare in American history. Now, if you all think back on that famous John McCain moment where he thumbs down the vote that was tried, this was tried twice during the first Trump term, but when he had that moment where he was the lone vote that voted to preserve Obamacare, one of the things about that moment was that essentially part of the reason was that people were really aware of the top line that the ACA was going to go away. This is death by 1,000 cuts, right? Essentially what they're doing is they're chipping away at healthcare in every way that they can possibly come up with, again, just to give tax breaks to greedy corporations and the ultra rich. In addition to that, there's all sorts of other things in this bill that people don't know about, like the fact that attached inside the bill is an attempt to destroy the SAVE student loan repayment program. This is really important for Gen Z and millennials, and I don't think very many people realize this. They are attempting to completely destroy income-driven repayment, which, by the way, for a lot of people means they pay zero every month for their student loan payments. By eliminating that, the average American student loan payment is going to go up by $400 a month. And all this doesn't include, the bill still contains a provision that would allow average everyday Americans to buy gun silencers. It still contains a provision that would basically prohibit courts from enforcing preliminary injunctions, temporary restraining orders through the use of contempt. That, by the way, would allow the Trump administration to get away with everything that it's currently trying to do. It would prohibit regulation of AI. It would also allow healthcare companies to use AI to make decisions about coverage. So much stuff in this bill that's really, really, really bad. So I think it's really important for those of us who are on this call, and it was really nice to be on there with people like Jess Craven and a bunch of other folks who, I pay very close attention to. It's really, really important for us to get the word out that this bill is really not just about the federal budget. It's actually an attempt to really destroy the healthcare for millions and millions and millions of Americans and to put people fundamentally in poverty, right? Cutting food stamps, cutting Medicaid coverage, cutting Medicare, cutting the ACA, and doing all sorts of other things financially with regard to student loans and all sorts of other riders that are truly going to be absolutely crushing to everyday Americans. Again, they are taking money from the bottom 40% of the nation to give it to the ultra rich. It's morally reprehensible, in addition to the fact that it really has to go. So again, I'm going to repeat for everyone. The bill is still hanging out in the Senate. And the reason why it hasn't gone to the floor for a vote, as Senator Warren told us yesterday, is because they don't have the votes to pass it. Because there are Republican senators who know that people in their states are going to starve and die if this bill passes. Because there are senators who are really worried about the fact that it's projected to add trillions to the federal budget deficit. And this is not Democratic speculation. This comes from the Congressional Budget Office, which is an independent, nonpartisan, evaluatory body that has said this is really bad. No less than the Wall Street Journal has condemned this bill as being incredibly destructive. So right now, this is a moment where our voices really need to be heard on this particular issue. And I just want to urge everyone, regardless of where your senators fall on the political spectrum, you must make your calls. Because if this bill passes, the destruction that it's going to wreak on, again, the bottom 40% of Americans, the people who truly are struggling the most and the middle class, will be unremediable until Donald Trump is out of office and perhaps for years beyond that. So critically important to do the right thing here. And I just have to say that, As always, Senator Warren is very inspiring. She has hope that we can actually crush this bill and change it dramatically or just stop it in its tracks. But it's going to take every single one of us educating other Americans who don't know what's going on about it and making sure that we, as people who are really motivated for change, make those phone calls, make them every day. Tell your senators how you feel about it. Tell them that you're not going to vote for them if they vote for this bill. Raise awareness from your own perspective, right? You're on the ACA, you should be calling your senator and talking about what your experience is going to be like if this bill passes. You have friends and family, or you yourself are on Medicaid or Medicare, you should be calling every day. People that you know who are on SNAP or people in your own community who are food insecure, you need to be making these phone calls. So really critically important. And also I will just add that there are things in this bill that provide additional funding for ICE, which of course is, another big topic today, that would allow ICE to roll out in every small town and community in America in the same way they're rolling out in places like Las Vegas and LA and Detroit and New York City. So if you don't want ICE to come knocking on your door or your neighbor's door or the door of the undocumented friend you have, you should absolutely be calling and asking for this bill to go down in flames. Okay. And Elizabeth Warren, as always, is freaking amazing. And so is her staff. Okay. We have to talk about LaMonica McIver's indictment very briefly. You all know she is my representative in the House of Representatives from the New Jersey 11th. She was indicted yesterday, again, for this event where Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark, was arrested outside the Delaney detention facility in Newark, New Jersey, just for doing his job. Of course, the DOJ has now dismissed the charges against Ross Baraka, but have now brought an indictment against LaMonica McIver. I'm going to remind everybody there's an old running joke in the criminal justice system that a good prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich because the standards for indictment are so much lower than the standards of beyond a reasonable doubt that you need to convict someone in a court of law. All that said, these charges are utter bullshit. Sorry for the enunciation, but I can't put it any more plainly than that. She's been indicted on 2 counts of assaulting, impeding, or otherwise interfering with Department of Homeland Security agents, namely ICE. She's also been indicted on a misdemeanor for the same charges, okay? Now, the thing I have to point out to all of you is there's video of what went down at the Delaney Detention Center that day. And what the video shows is that as Ross Baraka was being arrested, LaMonica McIver was trying to ask what was going on. And what happened was that ICE agents shoved her against a fence. She didn't assault anybody. That's not what the videotape shows. There's no indication that she was interfering with their ability to unlawfully arrest the mayor of Newark. She was just raising her voice to ask what was going on. And I and many other people think that this case is a complete dud, that it's not going anywhere. I'm going to remind you the U.S. Attorney for the District Court of New Jersey, who is responsible for this indictment, is no less than Alina Habba. We all know she's a crappy lawyer. She lost every case for Donald Trump that she represented him on in court. But in addition to that, we have to put this in the larger context of a recent judge being arrested simply for escorting someone through her courtroom because they claimed she was interfering with ICE. Now we have this indictment of LaMonica McIver, a Democratic progressive Black woman member of the House of Representatives, for allegedly interfering with ICE. And this seems to be another front on which they are trying to silence dissent. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think this case is going very far because inside the District of New Jersey, there's not a lot of tolerance for this. And Alina Habba has already been chastised by one judge here for going way outside the bounds of the law. So we'll have to see how this goes. But folks should be aware that, this is yet another thing that is kind of like in the wheels right now of the ways in which the Trump administration is trying to silence dissent. Speaking of which, we had yesterday multiple declarations of unlawful assembly around the country at pop-up protest events in solidarity with Los Angeles and in downtown LA itself. Now, I have to remind you all that it is extremely important to be aware of the propaganda machine when you are evaluating what's happening out there. Because last night in Las Vegas, an unlawful assembly was declared for an entirely peaceful march. I heard from people who were in Las Vegas last night while it was going on. And, people were like, I don't get it. Like all we were doing was standing around and chanting. And all of a sudden, there's tear gas and flash bombs and multiple arrests, 200 people arrested just for exercising our First Amendment rights. The same thing, by the way, happened last night in Santa Ana, California, not far from where I used to live out there, just south of LA, where the Santa Ana Police Department, again, declared an unlawful assembly and just randomly started arresting people without any reason. So this is the point where I have to remind you all that it's not just about the Marines and it's not just about the National Guard. It's also about the cops. Because one of the things that, we all need to understand from the perspective of how policing works in this country is that the police are empowered to enforce the will of the state. Okay. Lots of people have a completely, I will admit, indoctrinated idea of how policing works in this country. These police officers are arm in arm with the Trump administration in terms of carrying out unlawful orders to silence dissent. And they're doing it in conjunction with ICE, because a lot of these localities actually have agreements between local law enforcement and ICE to assist ICE in black bagging people, kidnapping them, and deporting them. So I've said for quite some time that one of the places where our resistance needs to live right now is in attempting to eliminate these agreements under the federal law between local law enforcement and ICE to do these things, right? You can, where you live, and this has been very effective in places like Glendale, California, which, by the way, ended their relationship between local law enforcement and ICE after the first round of protests in LA over the weekend. But also, it's been very effective in small towns, where small towns have said, nope, we are not cooperating. We're not cooperating. I happen to live in a place that is a designated sanctuary city jurisdiction. We are on a list now that is being targeted by ICE because our local law enforcement will not actively work with ICE to round people up and deport them. Many of you know that New Jersey has the second highest per capita number of immigrants of any state in the country after California. This is a place where you can really advocate and make a difference. All right. So remember that it's not just about being in the streets. It's also about the work that you do behind the scenes to advocate for the right thing. And that includes things like advocating for your police department to not cooperate with ICE, working to support immigrants and people who are here seeking asylum and people who are here who are undocumented to make sure that they are safe. All right. There's all sorts of work that can be done on this front. This is probably a good moment for me to remind everybody that coming up at 1 p.m. Eastern on Monday, we have a webinar coming at you on stealth activism. So if you're interested in joining us for that, I will drop a link up here after the live broadcast is over. And you can sign up for that and learn about all the ways that your talents may be put into good service right now, even if you're not able to be in the streets. Like if you can run a spreadsheet, people need you, right? If you can answer phone calls, people need you. If you're good with an email list, people need you. There's all sorts of ways in which you can contribute your skills right now to make a difference. Okay, so the Declaration of Unlawful Assembly seems to be the latest strategy that is being employed by local police departments around the country to silence dissent. Again, something to be aware of. And this is yet another reason why know your rights training, like what the ACLU has been running this week in support of No Kings, is really important, okay? In addition to the safety training that was offered by Indivisible, I think it was Wednesday night, it might have been Tuesday. You should still be able to get that on a recording, by the way. Indivisible puts all of their trainings on YouTube. So if you're getting ready for No Kings and you're concerned about knowing your rights and you're concerned about safety precautions, you should go watch those videos, okay? Somebody on the Patreon feed this morning, reminder, if you want to ask me questions, you can head on over there to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber to ask me questions for as little as $5 a month. Someone on the Patreon subscriber feed this morning asked me if they should rethink No Kings. And as I said earlier on in this week, we now have, I think it's over 2,000 No Kings events planned for Saturday. There is no way that they are going to be able to crush every single event. And I'm just going to say one other thing here, right? One of the things to remember is that a mass outpouring of outrage is a really important thing right now, because what it does is it shows others that it's okay to push back. So, as always, I advise people to take safety precautions. You should know who the de-escalation people are at the protest that you're attending. You should make sure that you yourself know your rights before you go. But I am not seeing anything that is indicating that like No Kings is a target, so to speak. There's much more concern about people in these kind of like uprising moments, these spontaneous protests, showing up to protest ICE. But even then, I have to say that like part of the ICE protest yesterday was traditional Mexican dancing and, like food carts and, line dancing. Honestly, like, one of the things that we need to be very aware of here is that the media is deeply focused on the one trash can that's been set on fire, and not on the fact that the vast majority of these protests are incredibly peaceful and even joyful in the way that they're resisting and pushing back. I did a broadcast yesterday on the fact that, the National Guard is standing around bored. They've put the National Guard in front of buildings where there aren't even protests. And this is literally just like, essentially, it's like a photo op to make it look like there's something to be afraid of when there's not. So for all intents and purposes, it looks like No Kings is going to be incredibly joyful and peaceful. And I would encourage you to attend an event where you are, with all the usual caveats. Know your rights, do your safety training, know how to de-escalate, or know who the de-escalation people are at that event, know who's organizing it. Very important. But I don't see any reason for people not to go. That's my 2 cents about it. Okay. This morning, we had a very interesting ruling from the Supreme Court, which people should be aware of. A unanimous decision. Shocking in this regard. But essentially what this decision says is that people whose homes are wrongfully raided by police, or by the federal government, rather, not by police, but by federal agents. So let's just play this out. ICE comes to your door. They think that they're at the home of somebody who has committed crimes and has a deportation order. Okay. Not that I agree with any of this, but that's a story for another time. They beat down your door and arrest you instead. Now, 9-0, according to the Supreme Court, you can file a civil suit against the federal government for that. This is the first time this has ever been permissible, by the way. So this is a really important ruling, and it's based on a 2017 event where a family was essentially like terrorized by federal agents who went into their home wrongfully. Okay. And so this is actually a really good decision. Now, I don't want anybody to be under the illusion that this changes anything in the near future, because the reality is that civil lawsuits, especially under the Federal Tort Claims Act, ding, 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 those of you who've been here for my law professor moment on that particular act will remember there's a process attached to that takes some time. You have to go through the Office of Personnel Management under Russ Vought. They have to either drag it out until you have had enough time to sue, or they have to give you what's called a right to sue letter, and then you can proceed in federal court, and civil litigation takes some time. But all that said, it is a bit of a deterrent, right? It says now that the federal government could be paying out hundreds of millions of dollars in civil lawsuit money in the event that they raid the wrong house. So I will take the win where I can take it, as with everything else. And that is the latest on that, 9-0. That's a little shocking, but it's 9-0. Okay. Somebody asked a question this morning about Elon and Trump's makeup. I'm just going to say something. They're not making up. Like, this is a moment where you have to kind of like see it through the lens of their narcissism on both sides. One of the things that has happened here with Elon is that all of his government contracts have been threatened as a result of his comments about Trump. And so this little rollback of like, maybe I was a little too harsh about Donald Trump. Maybe I shouldn't have called him a pedophile. That's really about Elon trying to save face enough that he doesn't lose the billions of dollars in federal contracts that Starlink and SpaceX have. Okay. So I don't think anybody should see this as a reunion. And, by the way, the thing we're going to talk about next is the most recent polling about Trump and his administration and everything else. And I just want you to know the support for Elon Musk across every single political identity is in the single digits. So anybody looking at that polling, Democrat, Republican, independent, far right, far left, is going to know that the one thing that is really truly going to drag down this administration is Elon Musk returning to some form of power in a significant public role. And I'm just going to tell you, I don't think that's going to happen. All right. I think what's happening is that he's realized that he's about to get his ass kicked and he doesn't want that. So he's playing nice. And we all know how Trump feels about that, because once you've attacked Trump, as he has said himself many, many times, he takes you down in every way possible for the remaining history of time. Okay. Poll numbers. These are very important. And you all know that, like, I tend to be fairly suspicious of polling, but this is a YouGov poll, which honestly has some of the most reliable polling methodology out there. Not everybody does. You guys heard me talk about this all through the 2024 election. Sample sizes means that the poll is conducted, and the statisticians are going to come for me again, but I'm going to tell you, I don't think, like, some of these numbers don't match up for me. How the questions are posed, the framing of all of this is very important. So YouGov did a new poll and Trump's numbers are like in the toilet for a lot of stuff right now. So let's just kind of talk about this, okay? Only 34% of America supports the deployment of Marines in Los Angeles, okay? A third, 2/3 of Americans oppose it. 2/3. Only 35%, so basically same numbers, support the deployment of the National Guard. Okay, 2/3 of Americans oppose it. A majority of Americans say the following, okay? People in the US who have young children who are US citizens, regardless of their immigration status, if they're undocumented, 54% of America says those people shouldn't be deported. If they are, they've been living in the US for years without committing a crime, 61% of Americans say those people shouldn't be deported. If they came to the United States as children, 61% of Americans say they shouldn't be deported. If they are married to a US citizen, 66% of the country says those people shouldn't be deported. This is across every ideology. Now, the splits are somewhat dramatic. I'm not going to lie about that. There are more Republicans that support deporting everyone than Democrats for obvious reasons. But the vast majority of Americans are wildly opposed to what the Trump administration is doing through ICE. And so one of the things that I want people to grasp here is that what is happening, right? The black bagging of immigrants, the snatching of mothers away from toddlers, the kidnapping of fathers while they're at work or out of their own homes, or the kidnapping of people out of their places of employment, out of the parking lot of Home Depot. They went into 7-Elevens, right? There was an event in Detroit yesterday where they kidnapped people again out of their places of employment. Americans do not support this in overwhelming majorities. And this is a tremendous opportunity for those of us who are actually out doing the work in some way of trying to push back against the administration. Because the more the public becomes aware of the fact that people that we know and care about, that live in our own communities, that are undocumented, are being kidnapped away from their families, kidnapped away from their places of employment, kidnapped away from their own community involvement, the more objection to Trump grows. And this is how movements are built, okay? There are a lot of people in the streets of LA who are not like the usual protesters. And, one of the things that I want people to keep thinking about is how we amplify what they're doing, right? This is one reason why I thought it was really important yesterday to talk about that video that the United Farm Workers put out of ICE trucks literally chasing farm workers through strawberry fields in Ventura County, California. Because that is they're hunting human beings. And it's impossible if you have a conscience to see a video like that of people working jobs that are incredibly rigorous, that are tough on their bodies to feed America, being hunted down by federal agents and not think, oh my God, I didn't vote for that. That's terrifying and disgusting. So it's really critical that we keep amplifying all of this, that we keep showing up in the streets if we're able, and that at the bare minimum, we keep educating our neighbors and our friends and people in our own communities about what's happening here. Okay, so that brings us to Trump's TruthSocial post this morning, which is confusing. He doesn't make a lot of sense most of the time. This one in particular was very nebulous, okay? But the general gist of it is that someone in big ag, meaning big agriculture, farming operations, appears to have gotten to Trump overnight. Because what the post says is that we care about our farmers. And what I'm being told is that the operations of ICE are taking people who do jobs that can't be replaced out of America, and that's hurting our farmers. Okay, when I saw that first half of the post, I was like, okay, that's actually true, right? This is very not the way Trump normally speaks, right? But clearly some big business interests got to him. But then he goes on to say, we still have to remove criminals from America because these jobs are being stolen from Americans. Not that most Americans want these jobs, which, by the way, is disgusting. But, nonetheless, let's just be real about it. The jobs that are being done in the fields in California and Florida and in Illinois by migrant labor are not jobs that the vast majority of Americans would care to do because, white supremacy. So one of the things that we need to think about here is the lens through which Trump is talking, all right? Because it's obvious to anybody looking at this that rounding up people who, for instance, work in the food supply chain to make sure that all of America gets fed is going to destroy the U.S. economy. It's going to destroy the food supply chain. It's going to create huge shortages and food's going to rot. Okay. Anybody looking at this with like half a brain would understand that. Okay. But then Trump's post goes on to say this. It goes on to say, changes are coming. Now, there's some reporters this morning who are like, that means Trump is changing his immigration policy. And I unfortunately did not read it that way. When I saw that, I was like, it comes right after the clause where he's talking about how we need to get all the criminals out of the country. And what I see in that is like, hooray, ethnic cleansing. That's kind of how it reads. So one of the things that we have to see here is how big the influence of Big Ag actually is on this president, right? Because if he's actually realized that like the immigration policy as it's being perpetrated by Tom Homan and Steve Miller is actually like who I'm now referring to as Stevie because I just can't call him by his name. Nonetheless, my perspective on this is that like if Trump has realized like, oh my God, big business who has put a lot of money in my pocket is not happy with our immigration policy, then maybe things could change. Okay. That's not like an ideal solution to where we find ourselves, but nonetheless, it might have some influence, right? But if what change is coming means is like, well, we're still going to keep kicking people out of the country, big business is just going to have to suck it up, then, we remain, and I would argue we have to remain in this place anyway, in a place where like public outcry is the only way that any of this is going to shift. So one of the things that I just want people to be like very mindful of is that the continued education about this is really critical. And also one of the things that we have to do here is reiterate that, they're not deporting criminals. They're not deporting people convicted of crimes. They're deporting people who are like working for a living at really, really hard jobs and doing it in ways that contribute millions and millions and millions of dollars to the US economy every single day. The more that we can find a way to really like amplify that and put pressure on the administration through public outcry, the more likely it is that this sort of stuff is actually going to have an impact. So again, polling's really bad. We know how Donald Trump feels about his poll numbers. And on top of it, apparently big business is really complaining to him. So that's one thing to watch. All right. Reminder again, we do have this webinar coming up on Monday on stealth activism. I would love to see as many of you in it as possible. And again, I'm going to drop a link up here after the broadcast is over. You can sign up for that if you would care to. Please like this broadcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe. And don't forget to comment if you're watching after the live, because that helps the algorithm know that you really like what we're doing here. And of course, I really want to encourage everybody to go to a No Kings event this weekend. There are so many. There's like, I think 30 events in my state alone. There's like, something like 6 in like within a few square miles of where I live. So please like get out and show your support. There's also lots of gay pride events happening this weekend. Please go out and show your support for pride. It's really important to stand up, not just for immigrants, but also for our trans, non-binary, LGBTQ SIBs right now. And for ourselves, if you happen to be in one of those identity groups, please show up, know that you are loved, know that you are supported, and let's, continue to step out and do the right thing. All right, people, I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. For our Patreon only subscribers, there will be a bonus broadcast tomorrow at 3:00. That's going to be short because I have somewhere I have to be for my kids within close proximity to that, but that will be at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. All right. Lots of love to all of you. I will catch you here tomorrow, regular time. Stay safe, everybody. All right. Bye.